October 23, 1942. El Alamein, Egypt. Night fell over the desert with unnatural stillness, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery and the low wind dragging sand across minefields laid days earlier. In a command caravan behind the British lines, Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery stood motionless over a map table, listening as reports arrived one by one. German armor was moving. Erwin Rommel had struck first. Montgomery did not react. The Africa Corps advanced with the confidence of a force that had made a career of speed and surprise. Rommel had done this before, at Gazala, at Tobruk, smashing British positions through daring thrusts and audacity. His officers expected the same now, a counterstroke, a clever maneuver, a moment of brilliance that would unbalance the enemy. What they encountered instead was silence. No reckless pursuit, no exposed flanks, just resistance, layered, deliberate, unyielding. Montgomery's order was simple and absolute: hold the line. British infantry dug deeper. Anti-tank guns stayed hidden. Artillery remained disciplined, firing only when targets were certain. Mines stayed buried. Every yard Rommel advanced cost fuel, shells, and men he could not replace. Montgomery watched the battle unfold not as a duel of generals, but as an accounting exercise. He knew exactly how many tanks Rommel had. He knew how many replacements would never arrive, and he knew time was no longer Germany's ally. Earlier that evening, Montgomery had spoken quietly to his staff. He dismissed talk of tactical genius, of bold strokes or clever feints. El Alamein, he said, would not be decided by brilliance, it would be decided by endurance. The side that could absorb punishment longer would win. And for the first time in the Desert War, that side was Britain. Rommel attacked with everything he had left. Montgomery let him. In the darkness, German columns pressed forward into prepared killing zones. Each advance gained ground measured in yards, not miles. Each success bled strength. Montgomery did not chase victory, he waited for it. To understand why Montgomery refused to move, one had to understand what had brought both men to El Alamein, and what each stood to lose. For Rommel, the desert had become a trap. His reputation as the desert fox had been built on improvisation, on seizing initiative before the enemy could react. But by the autumn of 1942, that reputation concealed a harsh reality. The Africa Corps was exhausted. Of the 560 tanks once available, barely half remained operational. Fuel arrived in trickles, often destroyed at sea by Allied aircraft before it ever reached North Africa. Ammunition was rationed. Replacement crews were inexperienced, and Berlin, increasingly consumed by the Eastern Front, could offer little more than encouragement. Montgomery knew this. In letters home, he admitted the situation was desperate. He warned his superiors that the next major battle could not be won without supplies that would never come. Yet withdrawal was politically impossible. Adolf Hitler demanded ground held at all costs. Prestige mattered more than logistics. Retreat was forbidden. Montgomery understood this better than anyone. Since taking command of the 8th Army in August 1942, he had reshaped it with a single purpose: eliminate uncertainty. Gone were the scattered deployments and improvised counterattacks that had doomed his predecessors. In their place came order, depth, and discipline. Every unit knew its role. Every commander understood the plan. There would be no sudden lunges into the unknown, no dramatic flanking maneuvers, only pressure, applied steadily until the enemy collapsed under its own weight.
Montgomery told his officers that the battle would be fought like a siege. Rommel would strike, he would strike hard, and then he would run out of strength. The British, supplied from Alexandria and Cairo, would not. As the nights passed, German assaults intensified. Panzer divisions pushed against the minefields, engineers clearing paths under fire. British artillery answered methodically, firing by prearranged coordinates. Losses mounted on both sides, but the balance was asymmetrical. For Montgomery, every tank lost could be replaced. For Rommel, each destroyed vehicle was gone forever. By the end of October, the German advance slowed. Radio intercepts revealed increasing urgency in Axis communications. Requests for fuel grew more desperate. Reports spoke of units operating at a fraction of their strength. Montgomery read them carefully and said nothing. He had no intention of saving Rommel from his own momentum. On October 26, 1942, the Desert War entered its most punishing phase. The moon rose over El Alamein, revealing a battlefield stripped of illusion. Burned-out tanks lay half-buried in sand. The air smelled of cordite and oil. The fighting no longer resembled a maneuver. It had become attrition, brutal, mechanical, and irreversible. Rommel felt the pressure tightening. He had returned to North Africa only days earlier after illness forced him briefly back to Germany. What he found was worse than expected. Units that once moved like blades now crept forward cautiously, conserving fuel with every mile. Officers reported engines shut down to save petrol. Some formations could no longer maneuver at all. Yet Rommel pressed on. He believed, as he always had, that willpower could substitute for material, that speed could overcome scarcity, that one more push might fracture the British line and restore the initiative. His orders reflected that belief. Attacks were launched at dawn, then again at dusk. Losses were accepted. Time, he believed, was the enemy, but time could be beaten.
Montgomery watched these attacks arrive and dissolve against his defenses. He had deliberately positioned his strongest formations where Rommel would be forced to commit his armor. He resisted calls from subordinates to exploit minor gains. Each request for pursuit was denied. Montgomery understood that the desert rewarded patience as much as audacity. Every German thrust that failed made the next one weaker. Every British unit held in reserve preserved future dominance. Privately, Montgomery calculated numbers. German fuel stocks fell below critical thresholds. Tank readiness declined daily. Luftwaffe sorties dropped sharply as aviation gasoline ran out. Intercepted messages confirmed what Montgomery already knew. Rommel was fighting the battle he could not afford to fight. On October 28, Rommel sent a message to Berlin. He warned that continued offensive action would destroy the Africa Corps. He requested permission to withdraw to more defensible positions. The reply came swiftly and decisively. There would be no retreat. The position at El Alamein must be held. The Führer demanded it. Rommel showed the message to his staff. It ended the discussion. That same evening, Montgomery addressed his commanders. His tone was calm, almost detached. The enemy, he said, was nearing exhaustion. British losses were acceptable. Supplies were abundant. Reinforcements were ready. The moment was approaching, but it would be chosen, not forced. This restraint was not caution, it was calculation. As October closed, the battle's rhythm changed. German attacks lost coherence. Counterattacks failed to materialize. British artillery fire grew heavier, more confident. The desert itself seemed to resist the Axis advance, swallowing vehicles and men alike. Montgomery still did not move. He knew that once Rommel's strength was spent, the war in North Africa would change forever. and he would not allow impatience to steal that certainty. November 2, 1942. At precisely 1 a.m., Montgomery gave the order he had been withholding for days. The British guns opened fire in a sustained barrage unlike anything yet seen in the Desert War. Hundreds of artillery pieces fired in a disciplined sequence, their flashes tearing through the darkness. This was not a probe, it was not a feint. It was the moment Montgomery had engineered since the first night Rommel attacked. Operation Supercharge had begun. By this hour, Rommel's army was hollow. Fuel stocks were critically low. Some panzer units could deploy fewer than 30 operational tanks. Anti-tank guns lacked ammunition. Infantry formations had been thinned beyond cohesion. The German command still spoke of holding ground, but the means to do so were gone. British armor advanced behind a curtain of fire. Minefields were breached systematically. Infantry followed set timetables measured to the minute. There was no improvisation, no rush. Montgomery's battle plan did not rely on surprise, it relied on certainty. Rommel reacted instantly, ordering what reserves he had left into the line. But reserves existed only on paper. Tanks broke down en route. Fuel convoys failed to arrive. Air support was sporadic. For the first time in the campaign, the Afrika Korps could not respond with speed. By dawn, the German line was cracking. Rommel stood at his headquarters and understood the truth. This was no temporary setback. The balance had shifted beyond recovery. His forces could no longer maneuver, no longer counterattack, no longer endure. He sent another message to Berlin, more direct than the last. The army, he warned, faced destruction unless allowed to withdraw.
The response came hours later. It ordered him to stand fast, to fight to the last man. Rommel ignored it. The decision was immediate and irreversible. Against explicit orders, he began preparations for retreat. The pride of the Afrika Korps would be preserved by movement, not annihilation. It was the first time Rommel openly defied Hitler in the field. Montgomery was informed within hours. He read the intelligence summary and nodded. The enemy was breaking contact. The battle was over. Yet even now, Montgomery refused to chase recklessly. The pursuit would be methodical. Supply lines would be secured. Units would advance only when fuel and ammunition were guaranteed. Victory, he knew, could still be squandered by haste. As German forces began pulling westward, burning what they could not carry, the desert campaign entered its final phase. Alamein had not been a duel of daring generals. It had been an exercise in endurance. And endurance had decided it. The retreat from El Alamein began under a sky heavy with smoke and dust. German columns moved west in disciplined withdrawal, abandoning guns, vehicles, and wounded men they could no longer transport. The Afrika Korps was still intact, but its authority, its aura of inevitability, was gone. For the first time in the Desert War, Rommel was no longer dictating events. He was reacting to them. British troops advanced cautiously, securing ground that had been contested for months. Villages once lost and regained were taken without resistance. Supply dumps fell into Allied hands untouched. Prisoners spoke openly of shortages, of orders that no longer made sense, of a command system trapped between reality and ideology. Montgomery addressed his army days later. His words were measured. He did not celebrate Rommel's retreat as a personal triumph. He described it as a consequence, the inevitable result of a battle fought on terms carefully chosen and patiently enforced. El Alamein, he reminded them, had not been won by daring charges or sudden genius. It had been won because one side could endure longer than the other. Rommel understood this as well.
In private correspondence, he acknowledged that the battle had been lost not on the field, but in supply rooms and ports hundreds of miles away. Courage had remained, skill had remained, but strength had been consumed beyond replacement. Against an enemy who could replenish endlessly, bravery was no longer enough. The consequences were immediate and irreversible. The Axis would never again seriously threaten Egypt or the Suez Canal. Allied confidence surged. Political leaders in London and Washington recognized that the tide had turned. Winston Churchill would later say that before Alamein, the Allies never had a victory, and after Alamein, they never had a defeat. But the deeper meaning lay elsewhere. Alamein marked the end of a way of fighting. The era of improvisation, of daring commanders outrunning their supply lines, was over. Modern war would belong to those who could plan, sustain, and endure. Montgomery had understood this before the first shot was fired. He had said nothing when Rommel attacked. He had waited while strength was spent. And when he finally spoke, it was with overwhelming force. What Montgomery said when Rommel attacked first was nothing at all. He let the desert answer for him.